Chapter 91. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 91. 2 rounds of pleasure. Ace smiled at me with extreme satisfaction before he slowly lowered me back onto my back on the bed. His large hands bent and then spread my legs wildly for him. I whimpered at the sensation of my pussy lips begin stretched open so widely. Hold your legs open for me, Rena. That's it. Good girl. Ace instructed as he placed my hand on my thighs for me to hold my legs open wide for him. Ace. I whimpered his name as embarrassment started taking over me. He could see my pussy very clearly in this position, and that was exactly what he was staring at. Ace smirked at me before he guided the thick head of his swollen cock towards my dripping wet entrance. My pussy twitched in anticipation of taking him inside of me. I had gotten so wet that my love juices had begun leaking out of my love hole onto my inner thighs. Rena. Ace called my name. I cried out the next moment when he suddenly thrusted his gigantic cock into my wet pussy. The wet sound of his abrupt entry echoed from between our body. My pussy clenched madly around his intruding cock as he filled me up completely. Ace reared back his hip and pounded into my wetness again, making me cry out his name louder than before. It felt crazy good that I wanted him to move faster. Don't clench around my cock too much. Ace teased from above me. My breathing was rough as my hip began thrusting up against his seductively. Ace's eyes narrowed at me knowingly before he reared his hips back again to thrust deeper and harder into my awaiting cunt. I cried out his name again as I ran my hand over the firm muscles of his back. Ace continued giving it to me fast and hard. His cock thrusting in and out of my hole as I moved my hips to meet his wild thrust halfway. His cock buried itself deeply into my wet hole and gave me so much pleasure. The thick head of his cock slid against my pussy walls as he thrusted his cock in and out of my cunt. I dug my nails into his back in my frenzy as I tried to deal with the mind-shattering pleasure that his cock was making me feel. When his cock rammed hard against my pleasure spot before ramming into my womb, I cried out and scratched his back. Ace chuckled above me at my reaction before he screwed his thick love stick deeper into me. My pussy made wet squelching sound as I squirted more of love juices onto his thick shaft. His cock felt so hot inside of me, and it made me feel so good. The sensation of his cock pounding deeply into my wet mess felt so addictive. More, Ace, I begged him shamelessly. About to come already. Ace teased. I couldn't reply to him anymore at that point. His wild thrusts and deep thrusts soon sent me over the edge, and I came so hard while screaming his name. Ace continued pounding his cock against my womb as I orgasmed spectacularly. Can you take one more round? Ace asked in wonder. I felt his cock sliding smoothly out of my hole, my wet juices acting as the perfect lubricant for his cock. My breath came out in short bursts, and I whimpered softly when he flipped my body onto my stomach. His large hand grabbed my ass and positioned my hips upwards towards him. I felt his presence close behind me and I knew what he had in mind. My pussy was still extremely sensitive from my climax, but I also wanted to feel more pleasure from him and give him pleasure as well. I moaned when I felt his cock pounding its way back into my wet cunt. This time he took me from behind and the angle of his thrust felt so different from when he took me from the front. He hit a different pleasure spot and I cried out in ecstasy. Ace leaned over me until his face was close to mine. I could feel the heat of his body against my back as he began moving on top of me, ramming his cock in and out of my hole. So good that your pussy feels so good. Ace murmured with utmost satisfaction. Ace. Ah. Ah. I cried out in shock at the raw pleasure erupting from my cunt and spreading all over my body like wildfire. I'll make you feel even better. Ace whispered into my ear. His hand traced along my arm until his hand overlapped with mine before he laced his fingers with mine. Although his thrusts were rough, I found this gesture so tender and loving that it pulled at my heart and made my chest felt tight. Ace reared back his hips and thrusted into me from a slightly different angle, making me scream out louder at the intensified pleasure. My pussy clenched hungrily around his cock to suck him in even deeper inside of me. With a few more deep thrusts against my womb, I came again while whimpering his name. This time Ace seemed to be at his limit as well. He whispered loving words into my ear before he bit down on my earlobe when he finally climaxed. His cock twitched wildly inside my flooded love hole before he stilled on top of me. I closed my eyes and floated in the peaceful afterglow of our loving making. It wasn't like I thought that what we had going on between us was righteous or healthy. However, for just now, please let me enjoy the pleasure of being held in his arms. Ace's point of view, my body woke up like clockwork. It had always been like that, and traveling didn't seem to mess up my biological clock. After falling asleep for around 7.8 hours, my body would wake up automatically. I glanced over at the woman sleeping close to me with her head pillowed on my shoulder. Unlike me, Rena was still fast asleep. I found myself debating whether I should leave her to sleep peacefully or to be continued. Chapter 92. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 92. Burning up the ways my hands and fingers were itching to touch and play with her told me that I was probably leaning towards the second option rather than the first. I must have been quite rough with her last night. After I took her from behind, Rena climaxed again and fell straight into a deep sleep shortly after. Before I knew what I was doing, my hand had started caressing her bare shoulder softly. From my experience with her, Rena was a deep sleeper. Perhaps a little too deep. Just like I had anticipated, my caresses drew no reactions from her whatsoever. Slowly, I ran my hand down from her shoulder along her arm. His skin felt quite warm to the touch, and I enjoyed playing with her fine and smooth skin. I kissed her cheek softly and she made a small whimpering sound. It was the same sound that I loved to hear. When I caressed her body, she would make a sound just like this. It was a sound that worked to turn me on, and that sound was having the exact same effect on me right now. I felt desire stirring in my loins as my body began pumping blood into my cock. My hands moved under the blanket to stroke her waist. My caresses were soft and gentle at first before I began feeling bolder. Rena whimpered a little louder, but she did not open her eyes. I began stroking her waist more firmly than before, and then I ran my hand down to the curve of her buttocks. My eyes continued observing Rena's face to gauge her reaction. Her face seemed more flushed than before. Her blush tinting her cheeks a beautiful shade of pink. Her lips seemed slightly swollen and pink as well, and I wondered if they were still swollen from my kisses from last night when I took her. I knew well by now that Rena's body was extremely sensitive and responsive. When I trailed my hands up the front of her body to her breasts, she moaned loudly. I thought that she would wake up at that instant, but she didn't. Her eyes lids moved a little, but she did not open her eyes. I sighed in satisfaction when my hand covered her breast. Her heart was beating fast, and I could tell that she was excited by my stimulations. Her turned-on state worked to turn me on even more, and I felt my cock getting harder and thicker for her. Her nipples were hard as I took them in between my fingertips and began playing with them in turn. Rena moaned and gasped as if she was having difficult breathing. Her pink parted lips looked so seductive that I couldn't resist kissing her. My lips captured hers in a passionate kiss. The heat of her lips surprised me, but it was nothing compared to the heat inside of her mouth when I thrusted my tongue firmly into her wet mouth. She's hot. Too hot. Rena. I called her name softly. She stirred a little but didn't wake up. Her breathing seemed unsteady, and her face had flushed a deeper shade of pink. That was probably when it dawned on me that something was wrong with her and that her reactions may not have been purely from my seductive touches. I placed my hand against her cheek and then her forehead. I didn't want to admit it, but it seemed like her body was burning up from fever. Rena. Rena. I called her name louder this time as I shook her body slightly. Rena made a sound before turning her head to the other side. A frown formed in between her brows. My lust died a sudden death, and in its place was a sense of guilt like I had never felt before in my life. Call an ambulance please. It's urgent. I need to take someone to the hospital. I called the lobby without hesitation. Rena had a high fever and no matter what I did, she wouldn't seem to wake up. I took her hand in mine and realized that I was doing it more to comfort myself than to comfort her. Rena probably didn't know what was going on anymore, although I kept on whispering words of comfort to her. What have I done? She was sick and I didn't even realize it. How long had she been sick? Was it since last night or even before that? Why didn't she tell me anything? Rena. I whispered her name. For the first time in a very long while, I felt scared. My mind felt hazy. My head and my eyelids felt so heavy, and it felt like I couldn't lift them even if I tried. I felt very tired, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. Scenes from the past flashed by in front of my eyes even though my eyes were tightly closed. Am I dreaming? I saw Ace in my dream, but unlike other unrealistic dreams that I've had of him in the past, the scene that I saw was one that actually happened in the past. It must have been a few years now since it happened, and it had slipped my mind. I saw Ace sitting on a bench in the park next to our office building. That was where I first met him. Ace didn't look much different now from what he looked like then. His arrogant and overly confident smile also hasn't changed. Suddenly, he smiled at me, and I felt very funny inside just like I did back then. Then when I looked down at my hands, I found thick wads of banknotes in my hands. Shocked, I began telling him to take the money back, but Ace just smiled at me teasing while he shook his head. He got up from the bench and then he bent down and placed a kiss on my lips. That was the first time that we kissed. It didn't exactly happen like this, but then again, dreams could be random sometimes, right? To be continued. Chapter 93. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 93. The devil's care. Now that I think about it, I still have the money that he gave me saved away in a separate account. How did that slip my mind? With starting a new job and dating Kyle along with other changes that came along with life, I never got around to talking to Ace and returning that money to him. I shamefully realized that I had been using the fact that he is the CEO as a convenient excuse to avoid him, thinking that he is too far away for me to reach. With the way things are now between us, Ace is more reachable than ever. I should find the right time to thank him properly for what he did for me and return the money back to him. After all, I never had any intention of using it and it wasn't a small amount either. Ace may not even remember all that happened between us before. To him, I was probably just some random girl that he ran into and took pity on. He teased me and played around me with for a bit and then he moved on with his life. The money that he gave me was clearly an insignificant amount to him, so he probably doesn't remember that I still owed him that money. It wasn't like he expected to get that money back from me. In fact, he didn't want the money back. Ace. I mumbled. I could see light through my eyelids and as my eyelids fluttered sparks of light leaked in. Slowly, I managed to open my eyes. The white ceiling that greeted me felt unfamiliar and so did the smell of the room. Where am I? My senses felt dull, and I had trouble moving my limbs the way that I wanted to. My body just felt heavy, and it took a lot of effort to turn my head to the side. Ace. I whispered his name. I woke up to find Ace sleeping with his head resting on the side of my hospital bed with his hands holding mine. How long had he been sleeping there in such an uncomfortable looking position? Why am I in the hospital? I mumbled to myself blankly. After scanning the hospital room with my eyes, I took in the 4 drip attached to my arm and then my eyes fell to Ace's face. He looked tired and had dark circles under his eyes. Instinctively, I reached my hand toward his face to smooth over his hair. Rena. Ace called my name when he stirred. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I apologized immediately. Ace woke up and blinked his eyes at me as if he couldn't believe that I was in front of him. He really does look tired. Rena. You're finally awake. How are you feeling? Does it hurt anywhere? Do you have a headache? Are you hungry? Ace fired rapid questions at me one after another. He seemed so panicked, and I had no idea what brought this on. I started giggling at his reaction and his bewildered face. Honestly, I never thought that there would come a day that I would get to see the devil CEO flustered this way. I don't know what you're talking about. I feel a little tired, but apart from that I'm fine, I replied before smiling at him reassuringly. Really? I'll call for the doctor now. Wait a moment, Ace said before quickly turning to press a button on the wall close to us. I still had no idea how I ended up in hospital. If I remembered correctly, Ace carried me to bed with him last night and then we ended up having some very rough and steamy sex. It felt good, I definitely remembered that much. After that, I guess I fell asleep, but I don't seem to remember anything else after that. Why am I in the hospital? I asked, still very confused. You had a fever this morning. Ace told me with a sorrowful look on his face. Oh, I had a fever. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to burden you like that. Sorry for making you worry, but I'm fine now. We can get back to work, I quickly said. What time is it anyways? This isn't the time for me to be laying in a hospital bed. I'm sure that we had many things planned for today as part of our trip. No. You should rest and don't worry about working or anything else, Ace replied with a deep frown in between his brows. But don't we have so much to do for our research? I quickly protested. My words earned me a disapproving glare from Ace that effectively shut me up. You should rest. Just sleep in bed here for today and another night or two, he said sternly. That's not necessary. I'm fine now, plus staying in hospital is expensive you know. I shot back. We're also abroad, I had no idea if the insurance that the company provided for me covered this. Stop worrying about trivial things like that. Just stay in bed until you feel better. Ace yelled quite loudly at me. Why is he so mad? I just thought that we should go back to work. Frankly, I was shocked at Ace's outburst, but I didn't have time to react to it before the door to my hospital room opened and a middle-aged doctor walked in followed by a nurse. After a while of inspecting me, the doctor seemed satisfied with the result. How is she? Ace asked with worry. There's nothing seriously wrong. She probably had a fever because she was tired and didn't get enough rest for a couple of days. Is that right? The doctor told Ace before turning to ask for my confirmation. That I guess doctors were the most accurate fortune tellers. He was right, I probably haven't had enough sleep for many nights now ever since before we left on this trip. The cause of my sleepless nights was none other than the hot and handsome man who was sitting next to my hospital bed. To be continued. Chapter 94. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 94. I miss him, I guess. I replied vaguely before smiling a little. What should we do? Should we let her rest up here for a couple of days? Ace suggested. No, that's not necessary. I'm fine now. I've had enough rest, I quickly replied before the doctor could. There is no way that I'm going to be stuck in his hospital bed for the next couple of days. I didn't feel 100% fine, but I wasn't sick enough to be bedridden in the hospital for days either. I think she's fine. Maybe resting here for the day would be better just to be on the safe side, the doctor said before smiling kindly at me. Are you sure about that? What if she gets sick again? Ace asked the doctor. I'm fine. I repeated again. I appreciated that Ace was worried, but I really didn't want to spend the night at the hospital. The storyline was also incomplete, and I wanted to work on that along with collecting more data on our trip. She should be able to leave the hospital without any issues. Of course, if she has a fever again or if she feels unwell, she can return here for treatment, the doctor replied calmly. You heard him. Stop trying to keep me here. We should be out collecting information to help with our project instead, I suggested. The doctor smiled at us before the nurse told him that he was being called. With a polite farewell to us, the doctor left the room. "Stop talking about work and focus on your recovery," Ace snapped at me. "Thanks for your concern, but I'm not as sick as you think I am," I replied stubbornly. "You had a high fever. You wouldn't even wake up no matter how many times I called your name. You have no idea." Ace began complaining before trailing off. I had no idea what. "What were you going to say?" I asked in wonder. "Never mind," Ace muttered before turning away from me. In the end, Ace didn't let me leave the hospital until the morning after. Despite the doctor's approval for me to leave, Ace kept me at the hospital for one more night to make sure that I was alright. Surprisingly, Ace refused to go back to the hotel and ended up sleeping on the sofa in my hospital room. That was how we spent a strange night at the hospital together on our trip. Right after returning from our trip, I focused all my efforts on completing the storyboard based on Ace's idea. Tomorrow, we had a team meeting, and the various mini-teams are going to present their own version of the storyline and draft storyboard. I had no idea if our storyboard would be chosen, but I was sure that we had a good angle that would be beneficial to the team. Now all I had to do is focus on finishing this. Apparently, taking the trip with me took a toll on Ace when he came back. I should have known that he was pushing aside some of his other responsibilities to go on that trip with me. As a result, I have seen very little of Ace since we returned to the office. I could tell from his calendar that I had synced on my phone that he was swamped with meetings from early in the morning to late in the evening. Conference calls with business partners in other time zones did not help his case at all. Since I had work to work on as part of Project Alpha, I could no longer attend all his meetings with him. It came as a relief to me when Ace told me that I could skip on the meetings to focus on completing the storyboard and sharpening up the message of our storyline. Apparently, Ace no longer had a lot of time to devote to Project Alpha. After a few days of not seeing much of him since we came back, I began worrying and thinking of him more often. I would wonder what he was up to now and how he was doing. Although I knew exactly where he was having his meetings and who he was meeting with, I just couldn't help but worry about him. The relationship between the new colleagues in my team and myself had not really improved. Thankfully, I still had friends from my own department who I could have lunch with. "Thank you for inviting me out to lunch today, girls. It's great to catch up," I thanked them wholeheartedly. We were walking back to the office building after eating at a nearby restaurant that was popular for their lunch set. The weather was nice, and I wished that I would get to come eat out more often. If only I could make friends with the other people in the CEO's office, life would be better and lunch breaks would be less lonely. I had not realized it, but I had gotten used to eating lunch and sometimes dinner with Ace. Now that he wasn't free to join me anymore, I felt quite lonely without him. Of course, I didn't want to admit this to anyone and not even to myself. "Anytime. We thought you were too busy now after you've moved over to the new team, so we were afraid to ask you out for lunch. It must be tough over there, but do your best," my college told me with a smile. "Thanks," I replied before returning her smile. She had no idea how tough it was on all fronts. Work, colleagues, and most of all, dealing with Ace and our twisted relationship. I didn't want to explain that to her or anyone else, though. We parted ways at the lobby of the office, and just when I turned to head to the elevator, I ran into the one person that I dreaded seeing the most. Rena. My body froze when I heard a familiar voice calling my name. Kyle stood right in front of me, and my body froze in place. To be continued. Chapter 95. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 95. You of all people, he's so close, if I just reach my hand out, I could touch him. However, not a single cell in my body wanted to do that at all. Since we broke up, he never got in touch with me, and although I haven't been actively avoiding him, it was probably best for us not to come into contact again. Is this just some unlucky coincidence? Or I used to love it when he said my name like that, but now it just made my skin crawl in such an unpleasant way that I found myself flinching before I took a step back from him to put some distance between us. Funny enough, we weren't dating anymore, so we didn't need to keep any of our interactions in public a secret from anyone. Is there something that I can help you with? I replied politely. I don't want to say it here. Come over here with me for a second, Kyle replied before turning and walking away from me. I stared at his back as I questioned why I should follow after him just because he told me to do so. One glance at the time and I found that I only had less than 10 minutes before I needed to head back. What does he want from me now of all times? It was curiosity and nothing else that made me follow him. Kyle stood to the side where there were fewer people walking around as he waited for me to catch up to him. What is it? I asked immediately when I arrived at his side. Why are you involved with the CEO of all people? He demanded to know. For some reason, I hated how he said the words, of all people. Oh, the audacity of what he just said. Of all the people in this company, I didn't want to ever hear this from him. I'm his personal secretary. Of course, I'm involved with him, I replied without a care in the world. Does the secretary have to sleep with her boss? Is that how you operate now? Kyle asked with a look of disgust on his face. At least, I'm not cheating on him with someone else while I'm doing it. Are we done here? I snapped back. You better watch yourself around him, Kyle warned sternly. As if I needed any advice from him. Thank you for your concern. Congratulations on your wedding. I hope your wife is well, I replied with a polite smile. Rena. Kyle murmured my name. My name is Karina. Have a nice day. Please don't ever approach me again. I said to him in fake politeness before looking behind him exaggeratingly as if to check that no one saw us together. Before he could say anything, I turned around to walk away from him. Instead of getting away, I walked right into someone. Shocked, I started apologizing immediately. I'm so sorry. I apologized even before looking at who I had ran into. Did you need something from my personal secretary? I froze at the sound of that voice and the fact that he wasn't addressing me. My body froze and my heart started to race. Slowly, I looked up to confirm my suspicion. Although I knew that Ace was the one I had just run into, I was still shocked to see his face when I looked up. How did he get here? His eyes were not focused on me, but a sense of dread welled up deep inside of my stomach. I closed my eyes as I cursed silently in my mind. I felt a pressure around my waist when Ace wrapped his arm around my body possessively. This is going to be a mini disaster at best. Why did he have to catch me talking to Kyle of all people? It's nothing. We're done talking now. I'm sorry for taking up her time. Have a nice day, Karina, Kyle replied smoothly. I turned to see Kyle smiling a little my way before he turned on his heels and left. Ace didn't say anything more, but the way his arm tightened around my waist told me everything that I needed to know about what he was feeling. Ace. I called his name softly while my mind raced to find a plausible explanation for the situation that he had just witnessed. It wasn't like I could tell him outright that Kyle called me here to give me a lecture about our illicit relationship. Just thinking about what Kyle said made my blood boil over in extreme anger. I might have been happy to listen to someone else warn me about Ace, but not him. He, of all people, had no right to badmouth Ace or whatever relationship that I may have with him. It also didn't bother me that he thought that we were sleeping together. It's none of his business who I happen to be sleeping with. Ace stared down at me with cold eyes before his hand grabbed my wrist tightly and pulled me after him. I looked down at where his hand was gripping me as I struggled to keep up with his long strides. People in the office lobby stared at us and I tried my best to keep my eyes casted down to avoid their judgmental gazes. Ace. I called his name softly. If Ace was aware of the gazes of the other people on us, he didn't act like he cared at all. He never looked back and he never said a word to me until we were together in his private elevator. The silence in the elevator was killing me inside, and I knew that I had to say something to explain to him what had just happened. In fact, the truth was, nothing really happened. Nothing happened. Kyle just wanted to talk a little. I mumbled softly. I hated how weak my voice sounded and how vague my words were. Ace didn't even look my way. I closed my eyes before letting out a sigh. This is going to be much harder than I thought. He's so mad. The elevator door opened and we finally arrived at his floor. Ace stepped out before me without looking back. Before I could stop myself, I reached out a hand towards him to stop him, but before my hand reached his back, I pulled back. What am I going to say to him when he turns around? To be continued. Chapter 96. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 96. Late night at the office. Not knowing what I should do, I left my hand fall back to my side. I stood in front of the elevator cluelessly as I watched Ace walk away from me. The air about him was cold and distant, it just made him feel so unapproachable. If you have time to flirt around with men, you should focus more on your work, Ace spoke up without turning to face me. I bit my lower lip as guilt overwhelmed me. My hands clenched tightly at my side as my body trembled from anger. I wasn't angry at Kyle or Ace, I just angry at myself. The CEO's office was busy as everyone seemed to be working hard on their draft proposal of the storyboard. After going on their own expedition to seek for the truth, the various teams have gathered to produce their version of the storyboard. We would all present the storyboard together in our next meeting and one of the storylines would be selected. It did occur to me that it was supposed to be a brainstorming session, so there was also the possibility that the final idea would be a combination of the ideas from various teams. No one spoke to me, and I was thankful for that because I wasn't in the mood to speak to anyone or deal with any drama. My eyes stared at the computer screen in front of me and the storyboard that was still more than half blank. If I don't get myself and my thoughts together, I'm going to be here till morning. Even then, if I couldn't get my ideas together, I may not be done. My mind kept conjuring up the image of Ace's cold eyes and his distant attitude. Then I thought of Kyle and what he said. A loud slapping round rang out and then pain shot through my cheeks. A few eyes strayed towards me, and I smiled a little awkwardly in return. I guess not everyone is used to seeing someone slap themselves a little roughly on the cheeks before. Focus, Karina. It was hard for me to concentrate at first, but as time went by, I managed to focus. After another hour, I was back in full work mode. After drafting some ideas and drawing sketches out on my notebook, I had a better idea of what scenes I was looking for each part of the storyboard. After finalizing my choices, I began creating a more detailed version on the presentation slides on my laptop. Not everything went smoothly, and I had to change things around quite often for things to feel right. It was time-consuming, but it felt like I was heading in the right direction. Although this was supposed to be nothing more than a draft to contribute our idea to the team, I still wanted to do my best. Partly, I wanted to redeem myself for my failure at the meeting before. This time, I will get this right and I will no longer be a burden to the team or treated like a free rider. With that thought in mind, I pushed through until I had completed the entire storyboard just like I had envisioned it in my head. When I looked up from my laptop screen again, the entire office was quiet and there was no one around anymore. Did everyone leave already? I didn't even realize it until just now. The clock on the wall told me that it was close to midnight. No wonder no one else was around. I knew that I probably wasn't the only one who worked this late given how committed the other team members are to their job. They probably just chose to take the work home with them. I should have done that, but I was so focused on the work in front of me that I lost all sense of time. I absolutely had no regrets about that, though. Since I've been here this long, I might as well do one last review to make sure that everything is right for the meeting tomorrow. It was such a shame that I finished so late and there was probably no time for Ace to help review this. That thought made me recall the look on his face when I last saw him earlier today. Things are not going well at all between us. I sighed loudly when I realized that I'll have to speak to Ace soon or later, and that meant that I had to think of a way to face him and straighten things out with him. What is Ace doing right now? He's probably gone home already. I pulled up his calendar onto my laptop screen and saw that his last meeting was supposed to have ended since 9 p.m. He's probably home already. Maybe I should just send him an email. If luck is on my side, he might get a chance to take a look at my storyboard before the meeting starts tomorrow. I should have managed to finish this earlier. Suddenly, I heard the unexpected sound of the door opening. Shocked, I spun around in my seat, and I found myself faced with an even more shocking sight. Ace. I managed to whisper his name as my eyes widened in shock. I blinked my eyes rapidly while I was half convinced that if I blinked my eyes enough times, the Ace that I was seeing would disappear into thin air like a mirage that never existed. However, Ace did not disappear from my sight. Instead, he strode confidently into the office and approached me. Why is Ace here? Somehow, I figured that you would still be here, Ace said confidently. I murmured without knowing what to say. How did he know that I would be here? Ace was now standing right next to me behind my desk, and without warning, he sat down on my desk and turned to grin at me. You didn't send me an email with the storyboard yet. So, I figured that you're probably still working your ass off at it, Ace answered my unasked question with ease. To be continued. Chapter 97. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 97. Pleasured by a bad guy, sorry that it took so long. I apologized softly. I'm not mad about that, he replied before he smiled a little coldly at me. I see. So, he's mad about something else. I didn't have to be a genius to guess what he was mad about. It felt like my luck had suddenly run out when Ace caught me talking to Kyle. Honestly, I didn't think that I did anything wrong, but I felt more guilty than ever. I also never expected that Ace would openly admit that he was mad either. Actually, I just finished the storyboard. Do you want to take a look? I asked, while trying to change the subject altogether. I moved my laptop closer to Ace before opening up the file of my storyboard to show him. Hopefully, seeing the effort of my hard work would make him less angry with me. Just when I thought that Ace would take a look at my work, his hand reached for my laptop and pushed the screen down firmly to close it. His hazel eyes stared intently at my face while my mouth dropped open in shock at this sudden action. I guess, he doesn't want to see the storyboard. Did you think that you would get off the hook simply because we're both busy for the day? Ace asked in a low voice. I'm sorry about that before. It's really not what you think. I mumbled softly. Then you won't hesitate to tell me what he said to you, right? Ace asked as he leaned closer to me. Subconsciously, I bit down on my lower lip while I hesitated. Kyle didn't have great things to say about Ace, and I was sure that he was just spouting nonsense. Regardless, it wasn't easy for me to come out and tell Ace to his face what that bastard had said. Meeting Kyle was such a big error on my part. Well, Ace prompted. It didn't seem like he was willing to let this simply slide by. Guess, I no longer had a choice about this but to tell him. He told me that I shouldn't get involved with you. Of all people. He also warned me to watch myself around you. I confessed before pressing my lips into a thin line. I did feel slightly better now that I was able to tell Ace everything and be honest with him. He's not wrong. I'm a very bad guy. Ace admitted very casually. I had not expected this reaction, or rather such a lack of reaction from Ace. I also never expected him to admit being a bad guy so easily either. While still stunned by his words, Ace's hands reached out and captured my chin between his fingers. I had no time to react before his warm lips were crushing down aggressively on mine. He kissed me roughly, while I moaned in protest. His hand held my chin tighter as his lips began moving against mine. I felt the wetness of his tongue probing my mouth open before he thrusted his tongue firmly into the wet depths of my mouth. I moaned into his kiss. Ace's lips continued moving against mine as he kissed me from various angles. His tongue slipping into my mouth to explore and taste me. He teased my tongue with his until I began grinding my tongue against his fervently as our kiss got wetter and deeper. I moaned softly into our kiss as his hand reached up my cheek. He bit on my lower lip, and I felt a slight stinging pain before he began sucking on it. His kisses felt so good that my mind was soon hazy with the desire that he had ignited deep inside of me. Ace. I whimpered his name weakly when he finally broke our kiss. I was panting wildly, and it took a lot of effort for me to call out his name. The look of desire that Ace had in his hazel brown eyes as he stared down into my face told me that we were beyond the point of no return at that point. My body felt like it was already burning for him. My core throbbed with desire and my pussy had gotten wet just from his seductive kisses. Even though it's late at night, we were still in the office and all the lights were still on. Ace. Wait. I whimpered when I felt the hardness of the table against my buttocks. For what? Ace asked teasingly before he silenced me with another passionately wet kiss. His tongue entered my mouth again and began teasing mine. Pleasure and desire clouded my mind from his intoxicating kiss. Ace's large hand started groping and fondling my breasts on top of my clothes while I moaned sweetly into our kiss. As if turned on by my reactions, his caresses got rougher. I could feel his touch even through my shirt and bra. As I lost myself in his teasing kiss, his fingers started to undo the buttons in the front of my shirt. One by one, he undid them until I felt the slightly cold air in the office on my naked skin. Ace broke our kiss, and I got lost in his mesmerizing eyes as he stared deeply into mine. His hand pushed my bra upwards to expose my breasts to his exploring hands. Ah, Ace, I moaned before I bit down on my lower lip seductively. The heat of his hands on my naked tits felt so blissful. I closed my eyes and moaned even louder when he massaged my breasts firmly, pushing them and pumping them against each other. My nipples grew rock hard as my body began writhing from pleasure, thrusting my tits into his large hand as if begging for him to touch me more. The places where he touched throbbed with desire and burned with need. I wanted him to touch me more. I wanted Ace to touch me everywhere. Ah! Ah! I cried out when his fingers started tugging on the sensitive perks of my erect nipples. To be continued. Chapter 98. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 98. Hot night at the office. I could feel Ace's hungry gaze on my tits as he played with them mercilessly. My lewd moans got embarrassingly loud, and I tried to stifle them by placing my hand over my mouth while Ace continued to pinch and roll my nipples in between his skillful fingers. Ace, that we're in the office. I murmured. We're not just in his office, we're in the CEO's office team room. Although it was late at night and no one else was here, all the lights are still on. Instead of responding to me, Ace buried his face into my breasts. I cried out when I felt something warm and wet running along the sensitive skin between my breasts. He's licking me. Naughty girls like you need to be disciplined thoroughly, Ace whispered darkly. My legs immediately grew weak as my pussy began throbbing with need. His lips moved to trial soft and sucking kissing against my breasts. My entire body trembled and he took my nipple into the wet heat of his mouth. My fingers clutched desperately at his hair as he began sucking on my hardened peak. It felt so amazingly good. I cried out his name and threw my head back as I thrusted my chest outward towards his seductive mouth. Ace sucked harder on my nipple as his fingers kept playing with my other nipple. The pleasure was so intense that my pussy began clenching in rhythm to his sucking. It wasn't long before I felt my wetness gush out from the hole in between my legs. He made me so wet for him. I wanted him to touch me there. And then take me. Ace. I whimpered his name sweetly. When Ace lifted his head from my chest and smirked dangerously at me. He stood up and pulled me up to my feet with ease, and then his arms were around my hips. I felt the hardness of my own work desk against my buttocks after he had lifted me up to sit on it. Ace did not waste time before proceeding to the next step of pulling my skirt up. His hands caressed my naked thighs tantalizingly before lifting them up and spreading them widely apart while I whimpered softly. Ace, maybe that we should stop. I suggested meekly. Even when you're this wet? Ace asked with his hand pressed against my wetness. His manly hand cupped my pussy through my drenched panties as he smirked knowingly at me. I blushed immediately before quickly looking away from him. He chuckled softly at my reaction before his fingers deftly pulled my panties out of the way so that his fingers could caress my wetness directly. Ah, Ace, ah, I moaned and threw my head back in ecstasy. His fingers found my wet entrance and began stroking it teasingly. He ran his fingers up and down the length of my wet slit, making my pussy throb and clench uncontrollably. He had just started touching me, but my pussy was already getting wetter for him. Your pussy is fucking wet, Rena. Ace teased me with a voice dripping with lust. His amber eyes stared right into my face before he smiled mockingly at me. He's so evil. But his touches feel so pleasurable. Ah! I moaned again. My hips bucked upwards at the sudden entrance of Ace's thick and long fingers into my flooded cunt. Ace thrusted his fingers inside of me abruptly and I had to close my eyes to deal with the pleasure as my hands clutched at the side of my desk. His fingers began wriggling inside of me. It felt so strange yet so good as he played around with my wet insides. I could feel his fingers everywhere inside of me as he felt around my wet hole from various angles. My pussy clenched and twitched around his fingers as it tried to feel more of him and suck his fingers in even deeper. You're twitching so much inside already. Does doing it in the office turn you on more than usual? Ace continued taunting me with his dirty talk. He thrusted his fingers in and out of my love hole fast and hard. I lost all control and screamed loudly. At that moment, I forgot about everything including the fact that he was fingering me right on top of my work desk. I was just working here. Not so long ago. And now. Ah! Ace. It's so good. I cried out as lust flooded my brain and all my senses. His fingers moved even more roughly inside of me as he thrust it in and out of me. Dirty wet sounds echoed all around us as my pussy got wetter for him. The sounds of his fingers pounded into my wetness combined with my lusty moans and whimpers echoed around in the office room. Ace, ah, oh, ah. I cried out even louder as I neared my release. He's going to make me come from his fingers. I can't hold on anymore. Don't come just yet. Ace said with a disapproving shake of his head. I whimpered my disappointment when his thick fingers withdrew from my pussy. Ace's hands moved to pull my panties off completely after instructing me to lift my ass off the table a little. His hand quickly moved to his own pants, and I watched as he efficiently stripped himself just enough to free his massive and hard cock from its restraints. His thick shaft stood up proudly in between his legs and I could tell that he was already very turned on. You really like to stare at my cock? Ace murmured before he smirked at me. His dangerous eyes held mine as he tore at the pack of condom in his hands before quickly slipping it onto his cock. Ace. I whispered his name in my need for him. I know you can't wait. I'll make you come with my cock. Ace offered smugly. His large hands gripped my thighs and spread them further apart as he positioned himself in between my legs. My pussy quivered in anticipation of receiving his cock deep inside. The heat of his manhood lodged itself between my pussy lips before Ace thrusted his cock sharply into my wet cunt. To be continued. Chapter 99. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 99. Unstoppable desire. I cried out loudly before I moaned at the pleasure of his massive thickness stretching my insides. His cock felt very hot inside of me, and my pussy fully enjoyed his presence deep inside. Your pussy feels extra tight today. Ace groaned as he pulled his cock back. His cock slid along the sensitive walls of my pussy at his exit before he rammed his cock back all the way into my hole. His thrust was so intense that it left me reeling from the impact of his entry. Ace's hips began moving faster and harder, thrusting his cock in and out of my sopping wet hole while I moaned. My pussy clenched around his cock as I moved my hips up to welcome his thrusts. Ah! Ah! Ace, ah! I moaned heatedly as my body moved in rhythm to his movements. His cock hit me deep and hard with each firm stroke. The pleasurable ache in my abdomen became unbearable, and so was the heat that burned deep inside of me. His cock hit my pleasure spot over and over again as it rammed against my womb. I couldn't focus on anything else but the pleasure of his cock beating hard and fast into my wet hole. I wanted more of him as my lust started to take over me completely. ACE.so deep. Your cock.is so big. I managed to whimper. I spread my legs even wider and thrusted my pussy upwards to swallow his cock into me. His cock diving into my wetness made lewd wet sounds erupt from between our bodies. The lewdness of what we were doing turned me on, and I was ashamed to admit that Ace was right. Doing it here with him like this really turns me on. You really know how to turn a man on. Ace groaned seductively. As if he wanted to reward me, Ace's hands moved under my buttocks before he lifted my ass up from the table and held it steady. When he had me where he wanted me, his cock pounded faster and even deeper into me. The heightened pleasure almost made me lose my mind right then and there. His cock hit me faster, harder, and deeper inside with each thrust. It started to hurt, but I didn't want him to stop pounding into me. Ace. I'm coming. Ah, that I'm coming. I screamed loudly when I finally climaxed. Ace continued giving it to me fast and hard while I rode out my intense orgasm. His cock felt so amazing inside of me. I love your face when you come, Rena. Let me see it again. Ace said in a sexy drawl. With his cock still buried deep inside my pussy hole, Ace lifted me off the table along with him before he sat down on my chair. His cock pushed all the way into me again when he made me straddle him. Was it just me, or did his cock get hotter and bigger? Don't hide your face away from me, Rena. Let me see you properly, he whispered seductively to me when I tried to look away. This position was even worse. I sat facing him, so it was difficult to hide my face from him. His amber eyes stared directly into mine before he suddenly thrusted his hips upwards. His cock rammed upwards into my cunt, and I automatically cried out at the pleasure that surged through me. My heart was beating so fast, and my pussy felt so sensitive from my climax earlier. Ride my cock, Rena. Let me see your face. Ace commanded as his fingers stroked the side of my face. His words turned me on so much, and I felt like such a naughty and wanton woman when I began riding on his cock just as he had commanded. I lifted my hips up slowly as I enjoyed the sensation of his cock slowly sliding out of my hole. When his cock had almost completely exited my wet love tunnel, I sat back down on his cock to draw him inside of me again. Over and over, I pumped my hips up and down the length of his enormous upstanding cock while I moaned heatedly. My breasts bounced around as I bounced my hips up and down his cock faster and faster. His hands reached out to play with my soft breasts. When he pinched my nipples, I cried out and my pussy clenched hard around his cock. That's it, Rena. Ride me faster. I want to come inside you. Ace urged me. His hands continued to play with my breasts as I slammed my hips down onto his lap to take his cock into me faster and harder than before. I angled my body and hips so that his cock would pound against my pleasure spot. Each thrust felt so deliciously good, and soon I was moving so wildly on top of him. Desire consumed me and I couldn't stop ramming my wet pussy down onto his hard cock. Ace watched me with intense satisfaction before his hand reached down to stroke my clit. I moaned incoherent words. The pleasure was too much for me. He's going to make me come again, and he hasn't even moved his hips yet. I knew that he was teasing me, and soon I would be showing him the face that he wanted to see when I reached my ultimate release. Let's come together, Rena. Ace suggested sweetly. His hand stroked the sides of my waist before moving downwards to cup the sides of my hips. I lifted my hips a little and he held me steady. Almost instantly, his hips thrusted upwards and rammed his cock all the way into my eagle-to-waiting pussy hole. Ah! I moaned before I closed my eyes in bliss. His cock continued thrusting up into my hole as I threw my head back and moaned. Ace shook my body and my breasts and hips moved around. He fucked me faster and harder as he raced towards his own climax. I'm about to come inside you, Rena, he groaned sexily. To be continued. Chapter 100. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 100. Risky move. I wanted to tell him that I was also at my limit, but I couldn't form the words. After a short moment of feeling his cock pushing against my womb, I came again. I knew that Ace was watching my face as it contorted into a mask of pure ecstasy as my climax hit me, but I didn't care. Ace pounded his cock fast and hard into me as he sprinted towards his own release. He moaned my name when he finally came. Excuse me. Is someone still here? My body froze as I lifted my head up to turn towards the source of the voice just now. Someone is here, I don't recognize that voice, though. That must be security. Ace whispered calmly. Security. As in a security guard. That made sense. Who else except for us would be here this late at the office? What do we do now? The guard was right outside the door, and I was sure that the door wasn't locked. Can you get off my cock, Rena? Ace asked teasingly. He didn't seem bothered by what was happening at all. Noticing that I was still sitting on top of him with his cock inside me, I blushed wildly before slowly lifting my hips off his cock. Excuse me. The lights are on, the guards yelled again. Shit. He's probably going to come in here to kill the lights. The door isn't even locked. Did someone forget to lock it? The guard mumbled to himself, but I could hear him with how silent the office was. I heard rather than saw the door open. Ace smirked down at me from above as I hid under my own desk. This is crazy. Why did things have to turn out like this? Because Ace messed up my clothes so much, there wasn't enough time for me to fix everything. That meant that hiding here like this was the only option for me. Ace, on the other hand, just had to zip up his pants. Oh, how convenient it is to be a man. Oh, Mr. Hills. I'm so sorry, I didn't know that you were still here. The guard immediately apologized when he saw Ace. I forgot to grab some files off of my team member and didn't want to bother him this late at night, so I decided to come here to sort it out myself. Sorry for making you worry, I'll be leaving soon, Ace replied smoothly. I rolled my eyes at how professional and serious he sounded. The security guard seemed shocked to be having a direct conversation with the Devil's CEO, and after a few flustered apologies, he wished Ace a pleasant evening and quickly left the room. I heard the sound of the door closing behind him and then I was all alone with Ace once more. You shouldn't have done that. I muttered darkly. Neither should have you. Ace replied softly. The way his eyes looked at me a little sadly told me that he was referring to my meeting with Kyle earlier in the day. I bit on my lower lip. This is so unfair, he knew how to shut me up very well. I had no retort, and I didn't know how to respond to that. Come on out. No need for you to hide there anymore, Ace said with clear amusement as he stepped away from my desk. I crawled out before letting out a sigh of relief. Somehow, we didn't get caught by the security guard. Talking about security. The security cameras. I whispered to myself in shock. My eyes immediately scanned the room looking for a security camera. Why didn't I consider this before? There are security cameras almost everywhere in office areas and we just did that. We handle a lot of confidential and high-profile projects here in this room. So, you're very lucky that we don't have any security cameras here, Ace whispered into my ear before he nibbled softly on my earlobe. Really? Although, I was relief of another worry, my heart wouldn't stop racing. Ace wrapped his arms around me from behind and he started chuckling in my ear. I heaved another sigh. Honesty, I really wanted to hit him. The meeting for Project Alpha finally arrived and I had to say that I felt quite ready and proud for the storyboard that I managed to put together using Ace's idea as the base. Everyone filed into the meeting room in an orderly fashion and took their regular seats at the long meeting table. Ace seated himself at the head of the table and the meeting was ready to start. Any volunteers? Ace asked. We'll go first. One of the members stood up immediately along with his two other teammates. Wow, I guess shyness isn't a trait that people in this team possessed. Everyone was so bold and very proud of showcasing their work. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentations from the various teams, and I could tell from Ace's face that many themes presented caught his interest. Just like how we went on our own trip to visit the market and dog meat farms, the other teams had their own way to conduct their own research to gather both information and inspiration. Various storylines were presented in many differing ways in captivating storyboards. Although the storyboards were rough and nowhere as detailed as the final version, it already gave me a good idea of what the teams had in mind. As the presenter described each scene of the storyboard, I could picture a very vivid commercial running through my head. It was an amazing experience. My turn now, I said as I stood up from my seat when it was finally my turn. Unlike the other people, I didn't have any other colleagues in my team to help me with the presentation because the boss needed to be the one listening and not presenting in this case. I smiled politely at everyone as I stood in front of the projection screen before I started my presentation. Sweat and tears went into this, so I had to say that I was pretty confident. To be continued.